Hi there. Please let your mind slow down and go at ease, and let me know in the comments where you're from. Also, what's your best tip for a peaceful night's sleep and keeping a calm mind? Whether it's a relaxing bedtime ritual, a favorite book, or a mindfulness practice, your advice could be just what someone needs. The roadblock. It was a quiet night, the kind of peaceful evening where the road seemed to stretch on forever, empty and endless under the pale glow of the moon. My girlfriend and I were driving home from a weekend getaway, the car's engine humming steadily as we passed through empty stretches of country highway. We'd been laughing, sharing memories from the trip, feeling that cozy sort of exhaustion that follows a day well spent. As we rounded a bend in the road, my headlights illuminated something up ahead, a makeshift roadblock assembled out of haphazardly placed cones, sticks, and debris. And then I saw them. Figures standing in the middle of the road, their faces obscured by dark masks, their bodies draped in heavy dark clothing. I slowed the car, my heart skipping as my mind raced, trying to make sense of the scene in front of us. "Who are they?" my girlfriend whispered, her hand tightening around mine, the fear palpable in her voice. I didn't have an answer. My gut instinct was to reverse, to get as far away from those strangers as possible, but they were already approaching, spreading out to block our path. There were 4 of them, each moving slowly, purposefully, their masked faces expressionless as they surrounded the car. One of them tapped on the driver's side window, his gloved hand leaving smudges on the glass as he leaned close. I could see his eyes behind the mask, dark, unblinking, watching us with a cold, calculated intensity. My girlfriend's grip on my hand tightened, her breath quickening. I felt my own pulse racing, panic rising in my chest as I forced myself to stay calm. I rolled the window down an inch, just enough to hear him speak, my heart pounding as I prepared for whatever demand he might make. "Hand over your valuables," he said, his voice muffled by the mask but unmistakably menacing. He raised a hand, revealing a glint of metal, a knife, its blade catching the moonlight. "Or things are going to get unpleasant." I felt a surge of dread, my mind scrambling for a way out. We were alone, miles from the nearest town, with no one around to help. The other figures loomed closer, their shadows stretching across the car, trapping us in a ring of silent menace. With trembling hands, I reached for my wallet, fumbling as I handed it over. My girlfriend passed him her purse, her face pale and fearful. I kept my gaze on him, watching every move, every twitch of his fingers, my senses on high alert. He took our things, slipping them into his coat without a word, his gaze never leaving ours. Just as I thought the ordeal was over, he leaned closer, his masked face almost pressing against the window. "Now get out of the car," he ordered, his tone low and deadly. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to refuse, to stay locked in the safety of the car. But one of the others stepped forward, banging on the passenger window with his fist, the force of it rattling the glass. I could see the impatience in their eyes, a simmering anger just waiting to boil over. Slowly, I opened the door, stepping out with my hands raised, trying to keep them calm, to buy us time. My girlfriend climbed out too, her body trembling, her eyes wide with fear. We stood beside the car, feeling exposed and vulnerable, their masked faces watching us with a cold, detached cruelty. They herded us away from the car, forcing us to stand by the side of the road as they rummaged through our belongings, tearing open the glove compartment, checking under the seats, their hands searching every inch of the vehicle. I clenched my fists, trying to suppress the rising anger and helplessness, my mind racing with ways to get us out of this nightmare. Then, just as suddenly as they had arrived, they began to back away, disappearing into the shadows at the edge of the road, leaving us standing in stunned silence. But I felt no relief, only a creeping, growing sense of unease. "Let's just go," my girlfriend whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, moving back toward the car, my gaze sweeping the dark landscape around us, half expecting them to reappear, to strike from the shadows. But the road was empty, silent, as though we had imagined the entire encounter. I climbed back into the driver's seat, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys, finally managing to start the engine. We drove off, the silence in the car heavy, oppressive, our minds racing with the fear and shock of what had just happened. But as we rounded the next bend, headlights appeared in the rear-view mirror, bright, blinding, and uncomfortably close. I squinted, watching as the vehicle behind us closed the distance, its lights glaring, almost pressing against our bumper. "It's them," my girlfriend whispered, her voice filled with terror. I felt a surge of panic as I pressed down on the gas, trying to put distance between us. But no matter how fast I drove, they matched my speed, their headlights filling the rearview mirror, casting an eerie glow over the dark road. I swerved, taking a sudden turn onto a smaller, winding road, hoping to lose them in the twists and turns. But the car followed, relentless, its headlights shining through the darkness, casting long shadows that danced across the trees. We drove faster, the car bumping over the uneven road, the engine straining as I pushed it to its limits. I glanced in the rear-view mirror, catching a glimpse of their masked faces illuminated by the headlights. They were watching us, their expressions hidden, but I could feel the malice in their gaze, a silent promise that this was far from over. Finally, in the distance, I saw a faint glimmer of light, a gas station, its neon sign glowing weakly in the night. Relief flooded through me as I veered toward it, pulling into the lot and parking close to the entrance. I glanced behind us, but the car had stopped at the edge of the lot, its headlights dimming as if the occupants were deciding what to do next. We hurried into the gas station, the fluorescent lights harsh and blinding after the darkness of the road. The cashier, a young man with earbuds in, looked up as we entered, his eyes widening as he took in our terrified expressions. My girlfriend whispered to him, explaining in frantic tones about the men who had followed us. He nodded, understanding, and gestured for us to stay inside, safe within the walls of the store. We watched from the window as the car idled at the edge of the parking lot, its headlights casting long beams across the empty road. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. And then, without warning, the car revved its engine and sped off, disappearing down the road, swallowed by the night. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, relief washing over me as I sagged against the counter, my heart still pounding. The cashier called the police, and we waited, recounting the events of the night in hushed voices, our hands still shaking from the adrenaline. When the officers arrived, we explained everything, describing the roadblock, the masked men, the car that had followed us. They listened, nodding gravely, and promised to keep an eye on the area, though I could tell from their expressions that they had little hope of finding the men. As we drove home, the reality of what had happened sank in. The terror, the helplessness, the feeling of being hunted. It lingered long after we reached the safety of our own driveway. And even now, whenever we're out on the road, I can't help but glance in the rearview mirror, watching for the telltale glow of headlights, wondering if they're still out there, waiting for the next unsuspecting travelers to come their way. The old doll maker's shop. It was in a small, forgotten corner of town, down a narrow alley that most people avoided, that I first noticed the shop. I'd passed it 100 times without giving it much thought, but that day, the dull glint of the sign caught my eye. Delphine's Dolls, established 1898. The faded letters were painted in an elegant, old-fashioned script, but the windows were dark and dusty, obscuring any hint of the interior. Curiosity got the better of me. I pushed open the door, a little brass bell jingling above as I stepped inside. The scent hit me immediately, a strange, stale smell, tinged with hints of wood, varnish, and something sweet, like decayed flowers. My footsteps echoed on the creaking wooden floor as I took in the dimly lit room. Everywhere I looked, I saw dolls, shelves crammed with them, each one frozen in a silent gaze. Some were dressed in delicate lace and velvet, their faces pale and porcelain. Others were smaller, made of wood with hand-painted features. But all of them had eyes that seemed just a bit too alive, a glimmer that followed me as I moved through the room. At the far end of the shop was a counter, and behind it an old woman sat, her head bent over a half-finished doll. She wore a faded, moth-eaten shawl, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and her hands moved with meticulous precision, stitching tiny details into the doll's face. She looked up as I approached, her eyes dark and sharp, almost as if she could see straight into me. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice raspy but clear. I stammered, feeling oddly flustered, as though I were intruding on something private. "Oh, I was just looking around," I managed, glancing at the shelves of dolls that filled every corner of the room. She nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. "I see. Not many visitors come here anymore. Most people think dolls are a thing of the past." Her tone held a strange sadness, a weight that seemed almost tangible. I glanced around, my eyes drawn to a particularly lifelike doll on the highest shelf, a small girl with a soft expression and eyes that seemed to glitter in the dim light. "Your dolls are beautiful," I said, not sure what else to say. The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you. Each one is special, unique." She gestured to the rows of dolls, her fingers trembling slightly. "They all have a story, you know." "Do they?" I asked, feeling an uncomfortable shiver run through me. She nodded, her gaze drifting to the doll she was working on. Each doll captures something of its owner's essence. A doll is never truly empty. It carries memories, emotions, fragments of a soul. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, as if she were sharing a secret meant only for me. I laughed nervously, unsure if she was joking or if her words held some deeper, unsettling truth. But something about the way she spoke, so calm, so certain, sent a chill down my spine. "Would you like to see how it's done?" she asked, her eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. I hesitated, but the pull of curiosity was too strong to resist. I nodded, stepping closer as she gestured for me to stand beside her. With slow, practiced movements, she began to assemble the doll, fitting together its tiny limbs, smoothing out the fabric of its dress, and carefully painting its face. I watched, mesmerized, as she breathed life into the tiny figure, her hands moving with a precision that was almost hypnotic. As she added the finishing touches, she murmured softly, her words too faint to hear, like a strange chant or prayer. "There," she said, stepping back to admire her work. The doll lay in her hands, its eyes closed, its tiny mouth curved in a serene smile. But as I watched, the doll's eyelids flickered open, revealing eyes that seemed to glisten, almost as if they were wet. The sight made my stomach twist. She held the doll out to me, her expression unreadable. "Would you like to hold her?" she asked, her voice soft, coaxing. I hesitated, feeling an instinctual urge to refuse, but something compelled me to take it. As I wrapped my hands around the doll, I felt a strange warmth radiating from it, a heat that seeped into my skin, filling me with a sensation that was both comforting and wrong. The doll's face seemed to shift, just slightly, its expression softening as though it recognized me, as though it understood. A strange dizziness washed over me, and for a moment I felt as if I were slipping into the doll, like my consciousness was merging with it, blending into the tiny painted face. A faint whisper echoed in my mind, a voice I didn't recognize, faint and far away. I strained to hear, but the voice grew louder, closer, filling my mind with a jumble of emotions: fear, longing, sadness, and something else. Something darker. Something that felt like rage. I jerked my hands back, nearly dropping the doll as I took a step away from the counter. The old woman watched me, her eyes sharp and knowing, as though she had expected my reaction. "They don't like to be separated from their owners," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Each doll holds a piece of someone's soul. When the owner leaves, the doll waits, remembering." I swallowed hard, feeling a cold sweat break out across my skin. I should go," I stammered, backing towards the door, my heart racing. She nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving mine. "Of course. But remember, once a doll recognizes you, it never truly lets go." I fled the shop, the bell jingling harshly as I pushed open the door and stepped into the cool evening air. I could feel her eyes on me, even as I walked down the street, the weight of her words pressing down on me, leaving an unsettling chill in my bones. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the doll's face, its painted eyes watching me with that soft, knowing gaze. I tried to shake off the memory, tried to convince myself it was all a strange dream. But the feeling of warmth, of merging with the doll, lingered, clinging to me like a shadow. In the days that followed, I felt it, a presence, subtle at first, like someone watching from the corner of my vision. I would catch glimpses of movement, flashes of color, as though something small and delicate were darting just out of sight. And sometimes, at night, I would hear the faintest whisper, a voice that was not my own, murmuring in the darkness. One evening, as I returned home from work, I found something waiting on my doorstep. A small package wrapped in plain brown paper with my name scrawled on it in a careful, old-fashioned script. My heart pounded as I picked it up, my fingers trembling as I unwrapped it. Inside was a doll, dressed in a familiar outfit, with a soft expression and painted eyes that glittered in the dim light. It was the same doll I had seen in the shop, the one the woman had handed to me. I felt a wave of terror and fascination as I looked into its eyes, feeling once again that strange, inexplicable connection. I don't know how it found me or what it wanted, but I keep it now, hidden in a box at the back of my closet, too afraid to throw it away. Sometimes, late at night, I hear it whispering, its soft, ghostly voice drifting through the silence, reminding me that it's still there, waiting, remembering. The abandoned playground. It was one of those strange, restless nights when sleep just wouldn't come. I'd been tossing and turning for hours, my mind racing for no reason, an unexplained tension settling deep in my chest. Deciding that some fresh air might help, I pulled on a jacket and slipped out into the night. My neighborhood was eerily quiet at that hour, the street lights casting long shadows across the empty sidewalks. I wandered aimlessly, letting my feet carry me down streets and around corners until I found myself near an old, abandoned playground. It had been closed off years ago, a relic from the past with rusty swings and a faded slide hidden behind a tall chain-link fence. But as I approached, I noticed something strange, a faint bluish glow coming from within the playground. Intrigued, I walked closer, pressing my face against the cold metal fence to get a better look. The glow was coming from the merry-go-round, which was slowly spinning, though there was no breeze and no one in sight. I felt a strange pull, an urge to get closer, to see what was causing this mysterious light. Almost in a trance, I found a gap in the fence where the chain link had been pulled back, just wide enough for me to squeeze through. I stepped into the playground, the ground soft and damp under my feet as I approached the merry-go-round. The glow was brighter now, casting an eerie light over the cracked pavement and broken equipment. As I reached out to touch the edge of the merry-go-round, I felt a sudden icy chill sweep over me, like a gust of wind that had no source. The metal was cold, freezing to the touch, and I felt my hand instinctively recoil. And then I heard it, a faint, high-pitched laughter drifting through the air like a distant echo. I turned, looking around, but the playground was empty, silent except for that strange, ghostly laugh. My heart pounded as I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to leave. But I was rooted in place, unable to tear myself away. The laughter grew louder, more distinct, and I could make out the faint shape of a child, a shadowy figure standing by the swing set, its form barely visible in the glow. The child's face was obscured, but I could feel its gaze on me, an intense, penetrating stare that chilled me to the core. Suddenly, the merry-go-round began to spin faster, the creak of metal filling the air as it whirled in place. The shadowy child moved closer, its shape flickering like smoke, its laughter growing louder and more insistent. I stumbled backward, tripping over a loose board, my heart racing as the figure loomed over me, its laughter echoing in my ears. I scrambled to my feet, bolting for the gap in the fence, the laughter following me, mocking me as I ran. I didn't stop until I was back home, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me, my heart still pounding. To this day, I can't pass that playground without feeling that strange, eerie chill. The memory of that laughter haunting me in the silence of the night. The man in the mirror. It started as a trick of the eye. I'd be brushing my teeth or washing my face, and I'd catch a glimpse of movement in the mirror, a shadow flickering in the corner of my vision, gone as soon as I turned to look. I chalked it up to paranoia, an overactive imagination, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Every time I looked in the mirror, I felt watched. One night, as I stood in front of the mirror, I decided to confront the feeling head-on. I stared at my reflection, watching closely, daring it to move. For a few moments, everything was normal. Just me, alone in the dim bathroom, my face pale in the harsh fluorescent light. And then, my reflection blinked. I froze, my mind struggling to process what I'd just seen. I hadn't blinked, had I? I tried to laugh it off, to convince myself it was nothing, but as I turned to leave, my reflection didn't move. It stayed where it was, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I turned back, heart pounding, and looked into the mirror again. My reflection was smiling, a slow, twisted grin that spread across its face, its eyes glinting with malevolent glee. I felt a surge of terror, my mind racing with questions, with fear, but I couldn't tear my gaze away. The reflection reached up, its hand pressing against the glass, fingers splayed as though it wanted to reach through, to break free. I stumbled backward, clutching the edge of the sink, my heart pounding as I watched my own face twist into something dark and hateful. I bolted from the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind me, and refused to look in a mirror for weeks. But even now, every time I catch my reflection, I can feel it watching, waiting, its twisted smile lurking just beneath the surface.